So we'll do something a little different. I'll co-present with Lindsay on our paper, When We Doesn't Fit. So the motivation behind this work is there's been a lot of kind of an explosion of technologies that are designed to try to change bad health behaviors. Everyone talks about how we're now more sedentary, we're getting more obese, and clearly this is something we need to fix. So oftentimes ways that we're trying to increase engagement in these technologies to change behavior, and we're trying to get people to change these sedentary behaviors is by using gamification elements. So we saw an example like in Dan's extra game earlier. Here's a few examples from both industry and academia. The fission steps was an early example, trying to get people to basically walk more by showing them this aquarium of a really happy fish and not lots of plants, or a kind of a dead, dying aquarium. And of course you have to compare your aquarium to your friends, and you don't want to have like the really sad aquarium on the block. So all these elements are being incorporated into these systems. Some commercial examples, the Nike Fuel Band, we see the Runkeeper and Wii Fit, which is the particular system that we chose to study in our work. However, really important thing when you're designing these systems is to understand the user context. What are the unique circumstances of an individual user that will contribute to how they react to these different persuasive strategies and elements in these systems? And that's something it's in these system design models. It's something that we know is important. And some work has started to look at this, so things like culture, how does that impact how you respond to these different elements? Big 5 personality traits, the gamer type that you may be, how does that impact the way that you'll respond to different types of game elements that are trying to encourage you to adopt certain behaviors. But we think that one that really hasn't been looked at that's really important just based on previous work is where you are in this process towards behavior change. So things like the trans-theoretical model that say that behavior change is a process, it's a complicated one, and not everyone starts at the same spot. They don't necessarily progress through it smoothly. They may go back, go forward, stop at different points. And this is something that really hasn't been thought about when we're considering how people react to these different systems. And that really drove our research question of how do these starting states impact users' experiences with a system, in our case Wii Fit, and do people at these different states, do they respond differently to different gamification elements, different persuasive strategies that are trying to encourage them to be more physically active? Just a kind of super brief overview of Wii Fit. The main way that people interact is in this training mode where you can choose from a whole bunch of different types of activities. You can unlock new activities as you kind of progress through. Things like strength training or little balance games that are more kind of in the lines of the mini games that Dan was talking about earlier. Or you can see here the kind of heading a soccer ball. You lean from side to side on the Wii Fit board and you get points for heading the soccer ball into the net and avoiding shoes and things like that you would not want to be hit in the head with. Or something that's a little bit more akin to maybe traditional exercise, like an ab exercise that we see on the other side. And you can see some of the gamification elements here. You get points, you get called things like a muscle legend, or kind of equally weak names if you have a lot of fewer points in these games. So that's a kind of a brief overview of the system. We can talk a little bit more if anyone has specific questions about that later. But our methods for our study, we basically did a 1-month-long field study where we recruited people who were just interested in trying the system. So what we did is we didn't give them any incentives. We just said we will loan you a Wii Fit for a period of 1 month. We started by going into their homes, giving them the Wii Fit. We observed their first use sessions. This is all people who had never used the system before. And we asked them interview questions. We left them saying, use this as if you just purchased it. Just do it, kind of take this as an opportunity to try this system out. We did collect log data from the system from that time of use. We also asked them to go online and answer some quick online survey questions after they use the system every time. We didn't remind them to do that, so compliance was pretty low because we didn't want to kind of impact the way that they were going to use it, but we have some data from that. And then at the end of the month, we came back into their homes, we watched them use the system again, and we also did a final follow-up interview. Types of questions that we focused on, we asked them overall impressions of the system, what they liked, disliked about it, how they kind of felt about specific feedback mechanisms like those stars being called a muscle legend or whatnot, and also about what their current and past fitness goals and routines were. And we asked those questions both at the beginning and the end of the month. At the end of the month, we also asked them about kind of what they liked about the system over the month, what they didn't like, how they used it, and how they felt about their progress towards fitness. So Lindsay's now going to take it over and talk a little bit about our participants and our findings.
Yeah, so as we were interested in looking at starting states, we decided to group our participants into 2 categories, beginners and non-beginners. So in terms of demographics, they were largely relatively similar. Our non-beginners tended to be a little bit younger. There are two groups differed mainly in terms of their past fitness experience. So specifically, beginners had little to no fitness experience, little to no fitness knowledge, and very little experience, especially in the past year. So these were people that either had never been particularly active in their life, or had been active at some point and had been inactive for a very long time. So these are people who were active when they were in their 20s and are now in their 50s, but haven't been active in, say, decades at this point. These people had goals in terms of really wanting to start to lose weight and start to get in shape, and hadn't had any, and were sort of in terms of the stages of behavior change very early on in these efforts. Our non-beginners, on the other hand, these were people that currently engaged in some type of physical activity, ranging from going to the gym, taking aerobics classes. Some people were actually very, very athletic. So these were people that competed in sports, collegiate level occasionally. These were people who fitness was an integral part of their lifestyle. However, they wanted to continue to either lose weight, work on muscle tone, or maintain specifically athletic performance. So these were really two different groups, and we saw how differently they reacted to Wii Fit. So starting with our beginners really, really liked Wii Fit. They found the combination of fitness and fun was inspiring, and it was a great way for them to get started on this path to behavior change. These people, they liked, including some of the stuff that we thought we might find insulting, is saying they actually were motivated by sort of this feedback. They were motivated by kind of watching their little me blow up and get fat and say, okay, like this is me. I need to not look like this. They got really, really into the me. So after each activity, they had a me that represents them. And if they did well on it, the me would jump up and down and be really excited. And if they did poorly, the me would kind of hang its head and shuffle its feet. And they got really into this. They didn't like seeing their me be upset. And so when we were doing the interviews, they were saying, like, I want them to be happy. And so they really got into the feedback. They liked the idea that getting a lot of really detailed information on what they were doing and how they were progressing was really motivating for them. In fact, in our final interviews, we found that 2 of our participants had actually purchased Wii Fit in the month, so that once we took it away from them at the end of the study, they could keep going with it. And this is sort of indicative of how into it some of these people got. The log data that we mentioned, we saw that beginners tended to use Wii Fit more or less consistently over. They showed a lot more use and a lot more consistent use than our non-beginners did. Which starts to allude to the fact that our non-beginners didn't have quite the same experience with the system that our beginners did. So the same gamification elements that really appealed to our beginners, the stars, the score, the me, the constant feedback, actually had a detrimental effect for the non-beginners. This is because it came after every activity. So an activity is a couple minutes, and then you would stop, and then you would get feedback, and then you would start again. And for people with some fitness experience, this interrupted their workout. So it actually, we're really glad we're presenting this on the second day, because after listening to Stefan's talk yesterday about designing for gamification, we're talking about the gamification needs to enhance the activity, not obscure it. This is actually how it played out for these people, right? So with the beginners, it didn't really obscure the activity because they were new enough to it that they could do 2 or 3 minutes of activity was kind of what they wanted at a time. Whereas for people who had more fitness experience, getting stopped constantly really impacted the ability to actually do the behaviors they wanted to do. Furthermore, the feedback that they were getting was often not appropriate for them. They didn't want to know, what a scale out of, that they got 3 out of 4 stars. That wasn't really useful for them in the same way that it kind of was. It was, while it was motivating for the beginners, the non-beginners kind of, they felt like they wanted something more, right? They wanted more concrete information. They wanted something that they felt integrated with the knowledge that they had. And this was often about, what muscle groups am I working? Am I losing weight? Am I burning calories? They also found that it seems sort of overly congratulatory at times. And so, if you did a tiny bit better than you had done the last time, your Wii's ecstatic and it's losing its mind and stuff. And so this is where they felt like they recognized that wasn't a big achievement for them, and the system was telling them it was. And it felt like there was a disconnect in their brain about how it was representing them. And as a result, they didn't actually empathize with their me in the same way that we saw that the beginners did. However, so while all of the non-beginners kind of discounted Wii Fit as a fitness system, we saw an interesting effect where some of them started to think of Wii Fit as just a game. So we had two groups of our non-beginners. Some that saw it as a fitness tool. It failed to be effective as a fitness tool for them, and they just kind of discounted the system. They stopped using it. When we came back for the final interview, they dusted it off and tried it again, and we're like, this isn't working for me. They had gone back to whatever they were doing before. But we saw a second group of people who really got into Wii Fit as a game and movement as a novel input. So it stopped being gamified fitness and started becoming an interesting game. And for these people, they really still got into it, and they still liked Wii Fit as a system and still continued to play it, but really were appropriating it for something different than how they initially thought. And this is where, for us, it was important that we weren't incentivizing our participants, and everyone came to us with the goal of wanting to use Wii Fit to help them for fitness. So these weren't people that never had any intention to use Wii Fit as a fitness tool anyway. These people wanted to use the system for this, found that it didn't work, but were able to find some enjoyment and had a reasonably positive opinion about the game overall and the input overall, while recognizing that it's not actually a workout for them. So this is a little bit obvious. Gamification isn't for everyone and everything, but we want to emphasize that we're not trying to bash on gamification here, right? It didn't work for our non-beginners, but it was actually really good for our beginners. The beginners really found it motivating, and it's got them up and moving. We did an initial study on Wii Fit earlier where we found that for some people that weren't very active, that Wii Fit could actually be a sort of a gateway to get them to do physical activity outside the bounds of a game. And so it obviously has some appeal. Furthermore, one of the biggest barriers for HCI tools is getting people to start using it in the first place. Wii Fit has sold a ton of systems. It's something like 20 million, right? So the 20 million people have found something interesting about this idea of fun and fitness and have gotten to use it, right? All of our participants were initially interested in using Wii Fit as a fitness tool. The implementation of the gamification didn't work for everyone. And it really sort of drives home the importance. It's sort of an intuitive idea, but we don't have a lot of empirical evidence yet about how the impact of gamification affects these different people, specifically with context. And this is a start as we think in the future about building persuasive systems that would grow over time, either for people that approach the system with different starting states, or a system that can grow with a person over time, as they may say cycle through. As they start with the system and then start to do activities outside the system, and then develop new fitness goals and come back to the system as they start a second stage of behavior change, and then can move out of it. And having a system that could grow with people would be really great. And with that, we'll take questions.
All right, thank you.